Hello, everyone, and welcome to Being LGBT plus and Muslim in Conversation with Kakan Koreshi. I am Sien, and I'm one of the Pink Singers, and I come from London's LGBT plus community choir. This is actually the second of our Pride Month talks, so happy Pride, everyone. It may seem a bit odd that a choir would have talks about different aspects of LGBT life, but one of the focuses of the Pink Singers has always been about promoting diversity, and diversity particularly in the LGBT plus community. We are a fairly diverse group ourselves, and we have a number of people from different genders, different sexualities, different religious systems, different ethnicities. But I think one conversation that we've been having over the last year is that there isn't often enough opportunity for us to fully explore the different parts that make up our wonderful whole. We haven't had the opportunity to hear the stories of people within our community. One of the topics that came up as a result of some of the Zoom conversations we've been having is this idea of intersectionality, which is where different aspects of people's identity can change the experience for a particular aspect. So even though Kakang and I may feel that we're both LGBT, our experience are likely to be different because of our different social statuses, our jobs, our ethnicities, where we live. And so this is an opportunity today to really sort of explore religious intersectionality, and particularly intersectionality with Islam. This is a topic that came up as a result of many of our community's conversations. And we actually have people who are of Muslim faith within our choir as well. So this is a wonderful opportunity to hear some of that story as well. So I'm joined here today by Kakan Quereshi, who I'm sure all of you probably know him already. He's a very accomplished gentleman. He's a support worker and a founder of Finding a Voice, which is Birmingham's first voluntary-led, multi-faith South Asian LGBT plus social and support group. He's also a diversity role model, a speaker, a writer, and one of Stonewall School Role Models. He organizes events for LGBT plus South Asians to empower them and inspire them to celebrate their authentic selves, offer support, provide representation, and a connection to reduce isolation and discrimination. And as many of you are aware, he recently spoke in support of the No Outsiders program in Parkfield Community School in Birmingham back in 2019. His faith has given him the impetus to question the traditional ways, culture, and boundaries or barriers that people have placed upon themselves. And he believes that LGBT plus Muslims can be united by reaching out and speaking up. So it's all very, very inspiring. And I'm really glad that you're here, Kakan. Welcome to this webinar. I guess I want to kind of...
Thank you, and happy Pride to you too.
Yeah, yay. I guess I really want to sort of, hit the nub on the head and when we start off. And the question I have really is that very often when we are told about Islam, certainly as an outsider, we're presented with this very clear binary. You can either be Muslim or you can be LGBT, but you cannot be both. I'm just wondering how you have come to synthesize the two.
For me, it was about reading the Quran and trying to understand what it means, and obviously trying to place everything into context. And as a young man, coming to terms with my sexual orientation and being from Birmingham, there wasn't much opportunity to meet other like-minded individuals or people like me. And so my coming out story was in London, whereby I met people from all different faiths and cultures and people expressing themselves as part of the LGBT community, which at the same time for me, I was somewhat appalled, but at the same time I admired it. I mean, it was a culture shock completely. So for me, when I was reading the Quran and the Bible and trying to make sense of what does it say about homosexuality, and I couldn't find anything, to be honest. And what I did find was a couple of verses, to minuscule kind of verses. And I tried to make sense of it, and I put it into context historically, what was going on at the time, what was sort of being said. And then the reference that everybody talks about is the story of Lut, and where they kind of interpret that as, this is against Allah, it's haram, it's a sin. I looked at that story and I thought, let's kind of break it down, and I analysed it in my own way. Now I look at it in hindsight as a very simplified story. The way people say, "Oh, well, that story of Lut is about homosexuality and saying it's haram," but the reality is there's a lot more issues and topics and a much more nuanced story in those verses than what we give it credit for. We don't look at the misogynistic aspects of it. We don't look at the incest, the rape, hospitality, and other issues and themes that crop up within that story. Remarkable, really. And on top of that, we don't look at who the guests were when they come into the household. The guests happen to be angels, and in my mindset, and everybody would say, angels don't really have a sexuality or an identity. So we kind of, when I say we, I think a lot of Muslims and Christians as well, they imposed an image onto angels so that it can fit comfortably with how we want to see the world more than anything. And so how I recognized it was, even though it's very traumatic for me, it led to a lot of anxiety, depression. I carried an awful lot of religious guilt. I realized that one day that, what the Quran wants of an individual, I think I carry those qualities. So I use the Quran as a moral compass and a social guidance. It helps me to navigate life and be more at ease with life more than anything. And once I learned about the Quran more and I learned to love myself, that's when I began to accept, that I can be gay and Muslim. Because if we're in the Garden of Eden and we're all supposed to be brothers and sisters, according to the Quran and the Christian faith, we're supposed to lift each other up and empower each other. And being gay, like you quite rightly said, is just another aspect of our being. And intersectionality covers an awful lot of realms of our personality and who we are.
Thank you. There's an awful lot to unpack there. I just want to say that, with reference to your conversation about angels, I don't know whether you realize this, but you're actually sitting in front of what looks like a halo behind you. I'm not sure that this was deliberate, but that's what it reminds me of. Fantastic. I think let's start maybe at the beginning, because I think I'd be interested in hearing what it's like to be growing up in the UK as the son of Pakistani parents, and how, I guess, your early identity was formed.
Well, I suppose in some respects I had a relatively ordinary childhood, or so it seems. I was the youngest of seven. My father was one of the founder members of Birmingham Central Mosque. My mother, on the surface, appeared to be a traditional housewife. So, my life as a child, it seemed to be okay, but the only difference is that whereby in the sort of Muslim Asian heritage family, the gender roles are quite set out, as it were. I found myself, rather than being drawn to football and the more sort of masculine, gender sporty areas, I was drawn more to playing with dolls, being in the kitchen, being with my pet mom in particular, and with my sisters as well. And I think that kind of built me into quite a shy, introverted young individual. But at the same time, it gave me more respect for the women in the household. But I knew growing up that I was different, and I couldn't quite put a name to it. I just knew I was different. I was teased and I was mocked mercilessly by my brothers and at school. So today we call it homophobic bullying, but at that time I just didn't have a name for it. I just thought, people are teasing me and it's just part of life. But I was gaining sort of abuse verbally at school and at home as well, especially with the mimicking and the teasing. But I also knew in my own way that I was drawn to kind of the men, and other boys. But again, there was no role models, there were no systems in place to talk about it openly, because all my life, and talking to other Muslims as well, all we ever hear is that homosexuality is haram. So once you're conditioned to think about those things, you don't want to be part of that thing. But for me, it was a case of, I've got to develop a better understanding. Why is it that everyone says homosexuality is haram. And as I said, I didn't really know until much later when I was a student myself in London. But as a child, it wasn't it was nice to be part of a big family. It was really great to go out on special occasions and be part of a multicultural community. But in terms of wanting to express myself, I think I was in hindsight, I would have been much more flamboyant if I had the confidence to be myself. The ironic thing is that my mom used to encourage me to sing songs like Mamma Mia, Gloria Gaynor's I Will Survive. I mean, we're talking back in the 70s now, and I didn't realize that those will become, classic gay anthems. So, but at the same time, I kind of helped my mom and the females in the household to dress up. I used to coordinate their clothes, what sort of makeup to wear. And again, my mom would encourage me to wear the what we call the dupatta or the sari, which is great under the age of 10. But once I hit puberty, that was a different matter, and again, it was a case of holding on to Kakan, which way is he going to go? Let's not have him singing songs anymore. And then I believe my brothers had suspicions about me, but they obviously didn't vocalize it. But all they knew is that I was a bit of a sissy or a Nancy boy. And that wasn't nice in itself, to be honest. And no matter how much I tried to turn away from that lifestyle or that sort of personality, I kind of suppressed it. And in order to try and conform, I just kind of shut down in myself. I became a real quiet person. And I find that that's very much with a lot of other people, especially those who are Muslim. They shut themselves down, and it's unfortunate because not only are we in the closet, but mentally as well.
Yeah.
We don't have that freedom to explore and express ourselves as much as we want. And that's kind of how my life was as a child.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, first of all, no one would ever accuse you of not being flamboyant now. So you've clearly caught up in all that time. But clearly sort of religion and family and culture was very important as kind of the foundational structure for your childhood. So when did you start to sort of, I mean, obviously you were starting to realize that perhaps you were different from other people, but what is your coming out story? How did you suddenly decide, or not even suddenly decide, how did you gradually come to the realization that perhaps there were things that you really needed to question?
I think what it was is that obviously my parents wanted me to be like a typically good Muslim boy. So they sent me off to a mosque, which I didn't really enjoy at all, to be honest. I was there short term, trying to learn the alphabet in Arabic and trying to understand the Quran as well. And at the same time, I've started questioning, why are we being sent off to the mosque? And why is nobody explaining to me what this is all about? And there's two things going on. One is I always asked an awful lot of questions that nobody could answer, with regards to either faith or relationships or the way men treated women. And at the same time, I also asked questions about, religions in itself. So by the time I hit my teens, I was very much religious minded anyway. I wanted to know more about Christianity and the other Abrahamic faiths, but I also wanted to know about Buddhism and other sort of non-secular faiths as well. But then at the same time, at school, actually, at secondary school, is when I kind of felt myself drawn to a couple of male teachers. One was a PE teacher who, had the whole package in more ways than one. And the other was my English tutor who offered an awful lot of support. He had time for me and patience as well. And ironically enough, we connected a few months ago through Twitter, my English tutor. And I asked him the question, how did he realize, that I would become gay? He just went quiet. but again, it was at secondary school whereby I began to question myself. I couldn't talk to other people about it. We didn't have any counseling services as such, but I was drawn to people in the drama departments that we had, who again were very expressive. They were talking openly about who they slept with or who they were having a relationship with. But for me, it was something else, because I daren't talk about these things. One is because we're brought up not to talk about these things. Hell, even when we seen two men or two women kissing on TV, our household was the type where you had to switch to the channels. It was that type of thing. Even if it was a chaste kiss between two men, that was very much taboo, and it was embarrassing, and it created a feeling of shame and guilt and saying that it's wrong. And so, through my teen years, that was a struggle in itself. Meeting drama tutors who openly express themselves as being gay. And this is at a time when Section 28 was coming in. HIV and AIDS was very much in the news, dominated the news. So there was 4 aspects of the world at that time in the UK, which kind of contributed to how I felt about myself. And today, I suppose we'd call it internalized homophobia. But at the time, it's just a complete struggle. And, in hindsight, maybe I was more asexual than homosexual. And that's why I kind of think, well, maybe, people are gender fluid over the decades as they grow and develop. But then at the same time, when I was a student in London, because my mindset was in 2 different ways. One time I would think very creatively, and then sometimes I would think maybe I should be female, and therefore trans, possibly. But other times when I was doing some other stuff, my mind would think very much like a heterosexual male. So again, I could have been potentially bisexual. So my teen years, from like 16 to 20, it carried an awful lot of conflict, inner conflict and turmoil. And I just really didn't know who to talk to about it. And I was extremely frustrated, and it impacted greatly on my mental health. But as I said, I managed to read the Quran, and that was a saving grace, to be honest. It gave me time to reflect on what was going on around me, and about me. I learned a lot about me coming through that.
That's very interesting. So I guess in the absence of, I guess today you'd have much more access to other materials to understand your sexuality or your gender better. But at the time, presumably there wasn't quite that amount of information available. You had to go to very specific places to seek it out. Whereas you obviously had the Quran available to you, and that provided you with a degree of insight into yourself.
Yeah, but at the same time, there was obviously in the media there was an awful lot of outrage about the gay plague, as they called it, AIDS. The advertising, again, psychologically, it played a huge impact on how I felt about it. And I even had some arguments with some people. Obviously, I was a young boy at the time, and I talk about is what they're doing, is it right or wrong? And not realizing that I would identify as such a few years later myself.
Right.
That's kind of turmoil that I went through. And I looked at life in a kind of very much, it was either this or that, black or white. And looking at it, it was not a good place to be honest. I had the Quran, yes. There was information leaflets out there, but again, it seemed to be geared or steered more to the white LGBT community. There was nothing, as far as I can remember, for Black or Asian LGBT. There was no role models. There was no support services as such. And even if there was, it was very so niche that you didn't want to be part of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because my upbringing was you have to try and learn to integrate with everybody around you and be much more inclusive. And as it happens, my group, Finding a Voice for South Asian LGBT, bizarrely. So, but as I said, it was. I laugh about it now, but coming through it all, it's quite emotional, to be honest.
Yeah.
I turn to.
I'm gonna say that I absolutely identify with that. I'm an immigrant myself, and I guess as a first generation immigrant, my feeling is to constantly try to integrate as much as possible and play down the my ethnicity and the culture from that side of things. I guess I wanted to ask you, now that we're talking about sort of the lack of visible role models, what was it like for you, I guess, coming out and joining the scene or going to pubs or meeting other people? What was that experience like for you?
Well, there was a number of things going on because in the media in particular, there was an awful lot of effeminate camp men on the television. You know, there was like people like some of the people watching now might be too young, but there was people like John Inman, you know, flouncing around and saying, "I'm free." And then there's Larry Grayson as well, you know, shut that door. And so, you know, these were characters, I suppose, which were larger than life. Everybody found them hilarious. But I couldn't identify with that at all, you know. And so it was trying to look for something that I could connect with. And the only way I could connect with the individual or representation was to go to the library and possibly find one or two gay themed love stories, which was much more about the younger generation coming through. As it happens, they were from the two books that I found were from America, you know, and that was something that it was a kind of quite strange really, because I looked at the book and on the one side I was embarrassed to have it, but on the other side I was really intrigued to know what was going on in that book. So that was my only kind of window of opportunity into the gay world initially. And then obviously there was drama tutors, and then having a faith or a culture whereby you don't go into nightclubs, or so it seems, but it didn't stop my brothers from accessing the nightclubs and going out and meeting girls. But for me, I just wanted to be much more of a young lad, more loyal to the faith. The only way I could describe it is, you know, have you ever watched East to East?
Yeah.
And then there's one character in there, he's kind of looking at the rest of the family, and he's kind of standing there and he's reading the prayers and being very straight-laced, I suppose. So I was a combination of him, but also a combination of intrigued by what does it mean to go into a club or a bar. And it took me an awful long time to pluck up the courage and the confidence to access up the gay bar in London, which was in Charing Cross.
Yeah.
Brief Encounters, which I believe has now gone completely.
Yeah.
You know, but it took me a period of like several weeks to pluck up the courage and then eventually go in. And when I did go in, after about 30 minutes, I left. You know, so I really had to build up that confidence to get in. And then one evening I went in, and I was a bit very naive, to be honest. And somebody's talking to me, and I'm trying to be pleasant. And then I realize he's chatting me up. You know, and then one thing led to another. And we ended up together for about 3 weeks, you know, which was really nice for me. And he's very gentle, very affectionate, but he kept saying, "I don't think you're ready for this." And he kind of showed some insight into what it means to be Muslim, and whether or not this will be sitting comfortably with my faith and culture. And he says, you know, you need to consider where you're at, and you know, would you go back to Birmingham, and you know, would you possibly get married? And I said, I don't know, I might do, I might not. You know, but again, it created a lot of confusion in my mind. But at the same time, it didn't stop me from going out occasionally and picking up several men over a period of time. You know, but I know, to be honest, I had 13 one-night stands. I had 13 one-night stands, and then about a year later, I came back to Birmingham, and I met my partner, who I'm with now ever since. But again, with my partner, it was a case of similar kind of questioning and conversations where he'd say, you know, are you comfortable with this? Are you accepting of yourself? How does your family feel? Do they know? You know, do you think you'll get married? And, you know, I leave those choices, life choices, to you. And he said, whatever you want to do, I'll respect that. And I'll, you know, if you want to go and get married,
Yeah.
I'll respect it and I'll accept it. And he said, my heart will be broken, but I'll understand. And as it happens, we've been together ever since.
That's
You know,
a lovely
going on to
story.
30 years.
I'm just wondering, when you returned to Birmingham, it was, I presume, a kind of homecoming, and I'm assuming that you then, you know, met up with your family again and fell back into the sort of the old ways again. But were you out to them? Did you tell them about your journey?
Not initially, no, because I came back to, well, I left London initially, and then there was something in me that says I need to fly to somewhere like France or somewhere. So I've never been to France in all my life at that point, and I only knew schoolboy French. But I was there for about 5 or 6 weeks, and again, it was time for me to reevaluate myself and assess where I was. I started writing a little story about myself, you know, almost like an autobiography, to be honest. And then the young woman I was staying with, again, she would ask questions about, you know, am I in a relationship? What kind of people do I like? Who do I find attractive? And she just said, you know, you'll be all right. That's what she said. And I had that kind of confidence at that point.
Yeah.
And then that's when I came back to Birmingham. And then I thought I need to try and assert myself as a young adult male. And I started going out a little bit more than I used to previously to go into London. But my mum used to question me a lot and ask where was I going and who was I with. And I just used to say I'm going out with friends. But then it was when I met my partner, or soon to be partner at that point, I started going out every evening, sort of about 6 o'clock, and then coming home about 3 o'clock in the morning. And my mom kept thinking this is a bit strange because I went from being very much a home bird to suddenly sort of spreading my wings and wanting a bit of a social life. And then we had one evening whereby she asked what was going on. And then that's when I broke down and told her at that point, you know, but that was about 6 or 7 months after I met my partner and after we got together, you know.
Amazing.
So emotional coming out, emotional. And then she said, whatever you say and you decide, I'll be happy with that. But she did say, don't tell your dad. But somehow my brothers found out, and I should imagine my mum told them eventually.
Yeah.
And again, there's lots of conversations about, you know, do you find women attractive? Do you get aroused? You know, and my brother, one of my brothers in particular, had said, you know, I will tolerate you. And I said, hang on a minute, I don't like the word tolerate. I'd rather you accept me. And his case was, well, I'll accept you only because you're my brother, which to me was a bit of a dichotomy, to be honest. But I had like months of each one of my siblings having this one-to-one confidential conversation about where I was, who I was with, what was going on. You know, it was, I suppose, good in their way that they offered me some kind of confidence and reassurances. But at the same time, it made me really angry and annoyed. And I resented them for it because they had their life. And as heterosexual men and women in the household, not once did I really question who they was with. And I didn't really ask them any specific or explicit questions about their sexual love. So I found that really quite strange. And in some respects, it kind of made me more angry about the way my siblings were reacting. Even though they kept saying, oh, we love you, you know, what more can we do? You're the quiet one. You've always done really well. You've always been a good Muslim boy. But as time went on, you know, things happened in my life that kind of changed events and my relationship dynamics with my siblings as well. To the point now, I haven't seen them for about 10 or 11 years. You know.
Yeah, that's sad, but also, and you know, in a way, I think you'd had the courage to take a stand and the right stand, and it's hard on you, and it must be difficult, but time has also presumably healed some of those pains. When we were having a conversation prior to this meeting this evening, you recommended a couple of books to me to read, and one of them was Homosexuality in Islam by Scott Kugel, and the other is Islam and Homosexuality, Religious Dogma, Colonial Rule, and the Quest for Belonging by Shafiqa Ahmadi. And I found this very interesting, particularly in the way they talk about how religious truth, I don't want to, I'm not going to do the air quotes, but with how truth is formulated, particularly sort of in terms of belief systems, and the importance of patriarchy in defining aspects of Islam, and how the truth is revealed through not just the Quran, but also other texts. I'm just wondering, from your perspective, how important is it that we revert to, I guess, a purer form of Islam that doesn't have that patriarchy layer on top of it?
I think what we look at is historically, you can look at books about Islam and Muslims in particular were very inclusive of other people, you know, and they were embracing other people. When I say other people, obviously it means LGBT. But somewhere along the line in history, sort of the 14th to 15th century, that's when things started changing. And, you know, from what I understand as well, that there was those who are in power, heterosexual, or those who appear to be heterosexual men in power. They're the ones who kind of corrupted what was said in the Quran, and made it seem much more anti, you know, anti-gay. And then obviously as time went on, this was again compounded by colonialism and the Christian faiths when they took over certain empires as well. And then again, it's about the psychology and the conditioning of how things changed. And as we said earlier, if you say something time and time again, repeat it, you begin to believe it yourself, don't you? You don't question it. And this is how things have happened. There are people out there who are trying to reform Islam, but I wouldn't say reforming Islam. I kind of agree with what you said. It's about looking at the purer form, which is the better form of Islam, which is much more inclusive, looks at diversity in through a better lens as well. And also the characters. What I would encourage people to do is read the Quran. There's variations out there, unfortunately, but read the Quran as well and develop a better understanding of where we're at in terms of homosexuality. As I said, there's not a lot in there, to be honest. What we need to look at is the bigger, wider picture about humanity, about how to interact with one another, how to navigate life, how to empower other individuals as well, and reach out to those who are less fortunate than ourselves. That's what I would say with Islam. It's what we need to be looking at more than anything. You know, it also looks at nature, the relationship of women, what kind of role women have in society. There's a lot of people out there, unfortunately, they either misinterpret the information or they send out, as Trump would call it, fake news, you know. And people are very gullible or vulnerable to that. They will, rather than go out and research the academics of Islam, and sort of transfer and translate that information for themselves in their own given life, they just go on and take on board what everybody else is saying. It's a bit like social media, really. It's that influence that people have.
Yeah.
And if you shout loud enough, people begin to believe it, which is unfortunate. And that's why I have utmost respect for people when you have a sit-down conversation and a dialogue as to what it means to be Muslim.
Yeah.
You know, when I worked with another housing association about 7 years ago, there was a young woman of Pakistani heritage, heterosexual, married. She'd talk about Islam constantly, about what the Quran says, and her version of it, I was like, you sound quite cruel and bitter, to be honest. And she said, well, what's your interpretation of it then? And she said, because I wouldn't consider you to be Muslim. And she said, because you can't be gay and Muslim, you know, the age-old saying. But when I had that conversation with her and gave her my interpretation of it, or my understanding, she was like, oh my God, you really know the Quran, don't you? She said, I never thought these stories, you put a different spin on it. And I said, because the Quran is about positivity. It's not about the violence like everybody is led to believe. It's not about throwing gay people off the rooftops, you know?
Yeah.
So it's about going down to the grassroots of what this Quran, the words are actually saying. Because if you look at the life of Muhammad, peace be upon him, or you look at Jesus or Moses, it's about how they navigate their lives and about how they empowered people around them or influenced other people to do well in this world.
Yeah. And speaking of influencing other people to do well, Finding a Voice, which is your group for South Asians in Birmingham, how did that get started?
There's several contributing factors, to be honest. I was going through my own personal issues with my family, and I was trying to reach out and look for something that can offer me support. and I couldn't find anything. And at the same time, I found a Muslim social support group online, and I began to question certain things that they were talking about. And somebody kind of said, "Oh, if you don't like what you see and hear, set up your own group." So again, that kind of contributed to how I was feeling at the time. And I was doing my research, and I found British Asian LGBT, which wasn't necessarily for Muslims,
Right.
but it was for South Asians LGBT. So I again started questioning and posting on their comments. And the editor of that particular page, she came back to me and said, rather than comment, would you like to become administrator? Let's work together. So over a period of time, I was thinking there's got to be much more substantial work out there for people like me, South Asian LGBT. We all tend to be in the closet, or if we are very vocal and confident in the workplace or in the family and household, we're not very visible in the mainstream. What support services were there in Birmingham in particular and the Midlands? There wasn't anything. All I could see was London and Manchester, mostly London. And I just thought, things have got to change. And yes, I know that there was the Birmingham LGBT Centre. And I contacted them as well. And I said, what do you have for South Asians or people of colour? And at that point, they said, we haven't got anything, because they found that groups, social support groups for people of colour, tend to flounder for whatever reason, which is quite unusual. And then I just thought, let me have a go. And we agreed that we have some kind of probation period for about 6 months. So I found my space. And I thought we need to bring people in, and several people turned up, which was a bonus for me, because I thought if one person turns up, it's a bonus. But I had 7 young people wanting to have a safe space to be themselves. Even now, I call them Magnificent Seven, to be honest, because it was a breakthrough. So Finding a Voice has been running for about 6-7 years now, except in the last kind of like 12 months, we all know COVID has had a major impact on life. But hopefully, I hope to restart the group again, but at the QE hospital instead. The idea was last year I worked in partnership with the QE hospital, and we were to have a community-based project. That was the plan. Didn't quite happen, but I hope to pick up on that. But Finding a Voice has been really good to me. The people that I met, the stories that we shared, the experiences that we've all had, and it's really, really nice. At some points, I felt really emotional because there was that connect, and it was like having a family. And that feeling of being isolated or lonely had just disappeared. And even though I'd been in a relationship myself, it's not quite the same. It's my partner is white, of a different age, different background. So when you meet people like yourself who are talking about their upbringings, culture, tradition, faith, the food that we eat, the kind of movies that we like, it really brings that sense of unity and belonging.
Yeah.
And it was just great, to be honest.
Yeah.
And then that led on to doing other things.
Yeah.
It led me to organising a South Asian LGBT conference and a Muslim LGBT conference as well.
Right.
And I just want people to kind of be more confident in themselves.
Yeah.
I used to advocate coming out a lot, but then I realised that people have to be comfortable and confident and learn to love themselves more than anything, and that will help. And that can help reconcile faith with identity.
So in many ways, because of your activity with Finding a Voice and all of these conferences, you have become the de facto go-to person for talking about Islam and LGBT issues and the intersection between them. I guess, is that how you found yourself at the heart of the No Outsiders protest. For people who aren't aware of this, or people who are tuning in from overseas, there was quite a loud protest back in 2019 when the introduction of No Outsiders, which is basically a program for children to promote diversity and make them aware that there are lots of different types of people in the world, was caused a lot of controversy with certain parents who then ended up picketing outside the school, and it became quite vociferous. It was covered nationally, and some of what was said was very, very unpleasant indeed. What was it like for you, Kakan?
Well, to be honest, my response initially was through social media, in particular Twitter, because that's how I was picked up by the media, because I was tweeting my responses and my concerns. And I just thought, what, as a person born and bred in Birmingham, and this particular complaint came through from a mom, and I just thought it's going to be one of those stories that is just going to be here for a couple of days, and by the end of the week, the complaint will be resolved. And to be honest, I didn't think much of it in that respect as a complaint. But when it continued and I kept responding to it, to think this does not represent either me as a person born and bred in Birmingham, and it didn't really necessarily represent Muslims, and neither did what they were sharing represent the LGBT community. So I was really upset and angry by the whole kind of misinterpretation and how things misconstrued time and time again. And then I reached out to Andrew Moffat, who is at the centre of it all, who had introduced the No Outsiders program. And I contacted him several times saying, look, let me come in, let me talk to your parents, let's try to make it more reasonable than what it is. And obviously he was told not to speak to any outsiders, strangely enough.
No,
but the BBC picked up on that. The BBC picked up on that, and invited me in to be on The Big Question.
Yeah.
And I think it was a case of I really couldn't control my emotions at that time. It just got the better of me. But what people liked was that I really opened up to say that, I'm LGBT, I'm Muslim. And if I had those particular books in my school when I was younger, it would have made me a better, confident child and a teenager, rather than be full of angst and anxiety. So I think that was a turning point, to be honest. And then I became the go-to person because, one, the school wasn't too far from my family home. And two, it was because I'm a Brummie and I could talk much more freely about Birmingham and what it represents and the kind of people that are there, and then it kind of splintered the whole kind of community, the Muslims versus LGBT. And from my perspective, I looked at it and I thought, to be honest, it looked like brown Muslims versus white LGBT. And again, that's how the media kind of painted the whole picture, because most of them protesting were brown Muslims, but there were other faiths and cultures complaining too, but we didn't get to hear about them. So this went on for months. I was on the radio, I was on television, I was in some magazines as well. And that's how I was thrust into the limelight, to be honest. But what I really wanted was, like I say, I wanted people to find their own voices and to speak up. And there was a number of individuals in Birmingham who are LGBT that I kind of says, we need to speak up about this. We can't let this go on anymore. And for me personally, I was kind of frustrated by the lack of positive stories to show the other side of what life is like in Birmingham, to show that, there are South Asian / Muslims, LGBT, who, as it happens, they tend to go to the nightclub that was going on, but nobody was visible in the day. And that's where my kind of, maybe it's an intergenerational thing, I'm not sure, because I see a lot of young people accessing club nights and expressing themselves really freely about being gay, but in the daytime it's hardly anyone. And that's it's quite upsetting sometimes.
I think, I agree with you. I think that visibility is very important, but at the same time, I too try to encourage everyone to sort of come out, but there are definite challenges there. You have to be in the right place, the right time. You have to have your own security, and before you make that decision. And I can understand how challenging it can be. I guess there are now several Muslim LGBT groups across the country, aren't there? So if people are interested in contacting a group that is about being Muslim and LGBT, where would they go?
Well, you've got the Nazamat Foundation, which is challenging religious homophobia. That's one of their mission statements.
Yeah.
You've got Nazamat Foundation, which they're based in London. You have Hidayah LGBT, which is a large national organization. And I think they have, as far as I'm aware, they have satellite groups across England and Scotland. And I think they're kind of venturing out into Wales as well. And you've also got London Queer Muslims. The name speaks for itself. And there's another one called Glitter Cymru in Wales.
Oh, Cymru.
Cymru, that's it. And so, there are some groups out there now, and you can find them on Facebook, Twitter. You can find the websites as well on Google.
Yeah.
So that's a really good thing, and they've only come about in the sort of since 2014, 2017, and it's really nice to know that they're still going strong now. So Muslims are kind of making themselves known now.
And what about finding a voice? Where do people go to find their voice?
Well, as I said, COVID has played a huge impact on how we are with that one. But I'm available personally online on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Finding voice information is on Facebook, www.facebook.com/findingavoice, and Twitter, it's @BrumAsians LGBT.
Okay, fantastic.
But
That's
anyone
really
can contact me for any information.
Okay, and I'm very mindful that we've actually. I didn't think the conversation would be quite so long because I'm really enjoying this myself. So I kind of lost track of time. But we do have 10 minutes for some questions. So people in the chat room, if you have any questions, please do pop them into the Q&A. And I see that we have Emma here, who's a PhD student at the University of Sheffield, researching the experiences of British same-sex attracted Muslim and ex-Muslim men and their relationships with brands and advertising. I wonder if you could let participants know about my project. Okay, sorry, it's cheeky, but recruitment has been challenging. I think that, yes, so everyone out there, Emma's doing this project. Emma, you might want to put the link to your project in the main chat, because that might well get people clicking. What I would say is that obviously, we had talked about sort of visibility and how confident people are to both come out as both LGBT and Muslim at the same time. And as I mentioned, even in our choir, we have people who are Muslim and LGBT, but they didn't feel that they were in a position to be able to host this conversation this evening, which is why I'm doing it. I guess for me, there's one question that I do want to ask, and that's really about how very often, as I said, as an outsider, you are presented with this. You cannot be both gay and Muslim. It's either or. It's neither. There's no overlap between them. And I know that there are ex-Muslims and people who have rejected it. And I can sort of see that in the experience that you went through, sort of a university, and then returning to a complicated familial situation in Birmingham, how it would have been very easy to simply reject Islam, but you chose to stick with it. And can I ask, how or why it was so important to you?
As I said, I've always been very religious minded anyway, and I wanted to know how faiths, kind of people of faith, how they navigate their lives, and I was kind of turned off by the more conservative nature of Islam, what some people call the more kind of extreme or the fundamental aspects of it. But for me, I think because of the way my parents were, and it's particularly towards me as a gay man in a long-term interracial relationship. As I said, my partner is white. He's 21 years older. He's, you know, he identifies as being a white working class man. I'm very proud of it. And I think what it is that when my parents actually met my partner, they gave their blessings in their own way.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, even my mom on her deathbed actually seen my partner in the hospital room and said, you know, you're the best thing since sliced bread for Kakan. And my dad at some point had said, you know, out of all my children's relationships, yes, they're married with children. He said, your relationship seems to be the best one. He said, you've got comfort, you've connected really well, you have civil conversations, you've got a beautiful home. The only thing that's missing is a child. And that was before LGBT people could adopt or foster.
Yeah.
So, you know, and to me, it was their willingness to accept us as individuals and as a couple that demonstrated that that's what being Muslim means.
Yeah.
You know, they could see beyond how we presented. They knew how we connected as individuals. And I think that's the beauty of it, because my parents brought me into this world and they gave their blessings on their deathbeds as well. You know, and I think that's why I think it's like I keep to the faith in honor to my parents. So even though I was a rebel in my own way and I became what to the majority is something haram, to me, it was like, I need to do this for myself and my parents, and also for other people as well, that we can be who we want to be.
That's lovely and very inspiring. I have another question. This is actually in the Q&A. So this is Ali. Hi, Kakan. Thanks for sharing your experiences with us. It's been so interesting. Given everything you've been through in your life, what would your advice be for young Kakan if you could go back and talk to him? This is Ali from the Pink Singers.
If I could go back, I think it's just about having confidence. I'd go back and say, you can do whatever you want, dress however you want, be whoever you want, you know, and just do what you feel comfortable with and what makes you happy, rather than listening to other people, what you should do, what you shouldn't do. I think the young Kakan will need to take that on board, you know. But I'm happy where I am right now in my life. But in hindsight, yeah, that would be the advice I'd give the younger person, is do what makes you happy. Like I said, I used to advocate coming out a lot, but I used to say to people, it doesn't matter if you come out or not, it's about, are you happy 24/7, you know, as yourself. That's what matters most.
Yeah. I have to say that I'm very impressed with your powder pink suit that you wore at the front of the Birmingham Pride Parade. Very stylish, very dapper. What was that like for you, being, you know, invited to lead the Birmingham Pride Parade?
Well, it's an amazing experience, to be honest. I mean, as I said, I can be quite confident when I want to be, but I still have, you know, people think maybe I'm a little bit introverted at times or a little bit shy. It depends on the circumstances. And for me, Birmingham Pride at that point, you know, I went from being, metaphorically speaking, sort of like from the back of the queue, you know, as a brown, gay, South Asian, Pakistani heritage person, Muslim, to suddenly I'm thrust to the forefront. You know, it was somewhat intimidating on the one side, because that was in amongst the throes of the protest, wasn't it, as well? You know, but it's to show solidarity to Andrew, and he likewise was showing solidarity to the Muslim community. But it was somewhat intimidating, exciting, enthralling, a whole load of emotions and adjectives, to be honest. But knowing that as an LGBT Muslim, I made history in that way, you know, and that's an achievement in itself.
Yeah. And it's very, very inspiring. And I'd say that, you know, just listening to you talk I could probably talk to you for hours on end, because there's so many questions I want to ask, and probably I will do at some other point. Sadly, this evening we have actually come pretty much to time. So unless there are any last questions, I'm probably going to wrap it up there. I want to say thank you very much to Kakan Quereshi for joining me this evening and joining us on the Pink Singers for this talk about being LGBT and Muslim. There's you've heard about the different places that you can go to find out more information about how these two aspects of intersectionality can be sort of reconciled, and you'll find people who are in very similar positions as well. So please do reach out and make contact. You're not alone out there. I would like to also highlight that as part of the LGBT Pride Month celebrations, the Pink Singers are also organizing another talk on the 21st of June. That's Monday evening at 7 p.m. And that talk will be about creating virtual communities in COVID. And we're talking to two exciting young individuals who created new communities for LGBT people virtually and internationally in the recent lockdown. So very interesting and very topical right now. Thank you very much, Kakan, for joining us. It was an absolute pleasure as always.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Take care now.
Take care.